Welcome to this week's episode of Talking Therapy. Talking Therapy is the companion podcast to my YouTube series In Therapy. We follow brave participants on their real-life therapeutic journeys with me. So as part of my mission to break the stigma around mental health, chronic illness, the fact that we all struggle, we all go through challenging times in our lives. And often what makes that struggle so hard is the fact that we do it in secret, in isolation, without having the support, the holding, the wisdom, the guidance we often need. And part of my hope with this series is you can become part of this community of people. And hopefully some of the ideas that I share can be a support and a guide to you as well. On this week's episode, we're going to be exploring the power of focus and commitment. This is coming out of David's most recent episode where he's really started to take some leaps forward. And it's really been the result of the effort and the work he's been putting in. So I'm going to speak to that. We're also going to answer some questions around gratitude, the benefits of self-love. I'll also talk about FOMO, the fear of missing out, something that I think is coming up a lot for people at the moment as the world starts to open up again and we think we should be doing everything. But often that's not what is most supportive to our own bodies and our own hearts. And that sense that we're missing out can sometimes drive us in ways that are unhelpful and unhealthy. So in David's recent episodes, he has just was letting us know that he'd had 3 new job offers, which is amazing, and accepted one of those. And this is a big change. If you remember back to David's first sessions, I did an exercise called the Wheel of Life, which is really about looking at the different areas of our life and sort of rating our level of current happiness and satisfaction with those, and getting clear on what it is that we want to work on. And one of the things that came up for David was career was just not fulfilling him. It's certainly not been the cause of his depression, but it's been a factor in why his life has not felt exciting and why he's felt stuck and frustrated and so on. Here's a clip from his latest episode where he tells me about these changes.
You know, obviously one of the things that was kind of rock bottom was sort of, you know, work and finances and stuff. Well, pretty much rock bottom.
Yeah. And last time we spoke, you were applying for jobs.
Yeah. So I'd been for a few interviews the last time we spoke. And in fact, I think I'd had one the day before or something like that. But I mean, none of them were, I felt that I'd done well in all of them. You know, I felt that I'd done as well as I could, but I didn't feel particularly confident about any of them. But yeah, I've been offered 2 jobs.
Congratulations. I think that's and well done for putting yourself out there and taking action on it as well. I think when you did that Wheel of Life exercise, it really felt like it was the career piece and the relationship piece were the 2 particular pieces that have been causing a lot of the suffering that's been going on. To have one of those pieces in a potentially very different place in the coming months, I think is a really great outcome. So well done. So ultimately, when it comes to making changes in our lives, we have to ultimately take action. It's like the idea of the law of attraction was something that about 10, 15 years ago started to get a lot of traction. There was a film called The Secret. And there was this moment in The Secret which just always really, really irritated me. There was this little boy, there's nothing wrong with the little boy, but the little boy had this dream that he wanted a bike. And he was like, you know, imagining, fantasizing, it was a red bike. And then this red bike just appears. And the sort of message of this was we just have to visualize what we want in life. And if we just think positive thoughts, then miraculously these things are going to happen. Maybe there's some truth in the law of attraction that we get what we focus on, but I'm a much bigger fan of the law of action. If we want things to be different, we have to do something different. You know, if you stand on the roof of your house and you jump and you flap your arms really fast, do you suddenly fly? No, fall and you have a pretty painful lesson. What we believe, though, does determine what we do. And the actions we take often have a big impact on determining what happens in our lives. And David had some beliefs around the fact that nothing was going to change. He didn't have what it took. There weren't other jobs out there, a whole set of beliefs that were in the way. As he started to change some of that, and started to shift what he was focusing on, and started to look at the possibilities in his life, and started to build his sense of self-confidence and self-worth by some of the homework that he was doing with me, that was a key part of the ingredients of ultimately this change. And our capacity for commitment and discipline and follow through, it's like a muscle, and it's like any other muscle. The more you work out that muscle, the stronger that muscle becomes. And of course, if you have a history of an achiever pattern, you're always pushing and driving yourself beyond your capacity, then you have to find a sustainable, healthy way to commit to things and follow through. So this is not just about going hell for leather and driving yourself and forcing yourself, but it is recognizing that if we want the circumstances of our lives to be different, then we have to do something different. We have to take action. We have to show up. And ultimately, what we do on a daily basis, the daily practices that we put in place and we cultivate, that's ultimately what determines what changes. And I think sometimes what happens is it's very easy to get focused on the sort of the big picture, like, the strategy, what I call the macro, like the sort of the complicated sort of stuff, and forget the importance of the micro. Remembering the importance of what you do each day. And that's why with all of the participants that you see in therapy, one of the things I really prioritize and focus on is this idea of psychological scaffolding. This idea that we have to put in place those daily fundamentals of daily meditation, of checking in with oneself emotionally, of working on one's thought patterns, and putting in place those daily consistent practices. It's often not exciting. It's often not the sort of glamorous stuff that we think about when we think about making breakthroughs in our lives. But those are the things that ultimately are what drive the change. And yes, you've got to have an understanding of the macro, the big picture, the direction, where you're going, sort of the reasons why you're doing what you're doing. But ultimately, what the actions that you take, what you do on a daily basis, that's really the heart of the changes that happen. I think also as part of this, you really have to be working on your inner critic. One of the biggest sources of sabotage when we're making change is that constant, you can't do it, you haven't got what it takes, you're going to fail, you're hopeless, you're useless. The inner critic I've talked about on this podcast, you've seen me, if you've been following in therapy, it's something that's a regular theme in the work that I'm doing with the participants. But defending against your inner critic, it's like that constant source of self-judgment is pretty much the biggest block to us ultimately reaching our potential and reaching our capacity. The more you can defend against that, the more space you can get from that, ultimately then the more able we are to live and to reach our potential. It's also worth bearing in mind that, and this is something I'm not going to go into detail here, again, I've touched on it in a few different places, but the inner child, this is the part of us that needs to have fun, to have play, to have connection, to have spontaneity, to take care of ourselves ultimately emotionally. If we're so disciplined and we're so driven towards the goal or the outcome that we're working towards, and we're just negating and rejecting the needs of that younger, more childlike place in us, at some point what happens is it gets really pissed off. It getting really pissed off looks like self-sabotage. And so if, for example, you've been really pushing yourself, let's say with food, and you're on this perfect diet where you never have anything that tastes of anything good. I'm being a bit extreme here. And you're so rigorous and you're so hard on yourself and you're so disciplined with yourself. At some point, your inner child is going to get pissed off. And it getting pissed off is probably looking like completely violating and breaking the diet and then feeling like you failed and then just completely falling off the wagon of what it is that you're trying to do. So by not going too extreme, by not rejecting and ignoring, but ultimately by taking care of that younger part of us that needs play, that needs connection, that needs spontaneity, we're ultimately more able to follow through. To put it another way, having real focus and commitment, it's not just about going gung-ho and sort of going all out for something. That rarely sustains. We have to be more intelligent than that. We have to look at what are the daily practices and keep reassessing along the way. Are these still the practices that are most going to support me? Sometimes the breakthrough at one stage becomes the block at the next stage, becomes the limitation at the next stage. And so it's not just kind of going hell for leather in a certain direction. We have to, as I say, look out for our inner critic. If we're constantly beating up and judging ourselves, it gets in the way. We have to take care of that younger, more vulnerable, more childlike place in us. Balancing and working with these different elements, then ultimately what we find is we can then sustain with the goals and the commitments and the challenges we're putting in place for ourselves. So I want to come to some of your questions now. Just a reminder that your questions are super helpful for this podcast. Apart from being the raw material for the podcast, it also really helps me get a sense with the episodes in the series, what's landing, what's not landing, what it will be helpful for me to clarify. You can email questions to hello@alexhoward.com. You can also post them below any of the videos on my YouTube channel. So the first question that we've got is from Jill. And Jill says, asked after David's episode 7, thank you, David, for sharing your story. Congratulations on your job offers. It's great to listen to your journey. And a question for Alex. Could you talk about gratitude? How do you put it into an everyday practice? So it's very simple, but it's not easy. It's simple in as much as gratitude is about looking for things that we can be grateful for. There's a part of our mind called our reticular activating system, and its job is to look for patterns. If we deliberately look for the things in our life which are good, we're going to see more of those. If we deliberately look for what's wrong in our life, we're going to see more of that. Now, this is a balance. We don't want to go into a place of being toxically positive about this, where we're ignoring what's bad and just sort of constantly forcing ourselves to focus on what's good. But it's really a deliberate practice of recognizing that we all have things in our lives that we can be grateful for. And by choosing to focus on those, ultimately, we often feel more nurtured and feel better as a result of doing that. I recorded a gratitude meditation, which is free on my YouTube channel. That could be a real support. Maybe just commit to listening to that every day for a week. That alone, I think, could be a powerful way of cultivating cultivating a sense of more gratitude. Also, I would say gratitude is a state. And it's like any other state. The more we practice going into that state, the easier it then becomes to be in that state. It's why we train ourselves to feel depressed. We naturally default there. That almost becomes our default place that we go to emotionally. Practicing gratitude will mean it's easier for you to find that place. We also had another question around Katie's episode 6. And thanks, Katie, for sharing your story. Alex, could you talk about the benefits of self-love? Well, our relationship with ourselves is the single most important relationship in our life, because it's the relationship from which all of our other relationships happen. How we are with ourselves is what impacts how we meet the world. So beyond just being able to be more in a healing state and feeling better in ourselves and all the obvious benefits of self-love, like feeling love in our body and in ourselves, it also impacts everything else in our life, all of our interactions, the people that we love, that we care about. If we want to bring love into our world and into the people in our world, focus on self-love. Self-love also calms your nervous system. This is, I think, a really important principle. If we want to calm a maladaptive stress response, we have to cultivate that place in our body of softness and gentleness and love and care. The more we do this, it's almost hard to paint a picture of just how much it can change the other relationships in our life. It's such an important thing. In fact, this is not a deliberate promotion of something. This is not a promise of something, but I've just started designing what I'm planning on as the follow-up program to the Reset program, which will hopefully come out before the end of the year. And as a clue, this is a big part of what that program is at the moment designed to be focused on. Finally, I wanted to talk about FOMO, the fear of missing out. I think I've talked a little bit at the end of the last two podcasts about sort of lockdown, at least in the UK, as I'm kind of recording this, other places like India started to lock down more, but there's places like the UK, we're opening up at the moment. And there can be this sense that there's all of these activities that we've not been doing and all of these things that perhaps we're getting invited to. And it might be because of health issues, we're limited in our actual capacity to do those things, or it may be that we just feel overwhelmed. It just feels like too much for us. So the first thing I would say is stay focused on and stay true to you. Regardless of what everyone else is thinking and doing, what brings you joy and happiness in your life? Because that should be your guiding compass, not what you think you should be doing, what you think you shouldn't be doing. If the thing that brings you more joy than anything else is sitting in your garden, listening to music, reading a book, one of the things that I love to do, you shouldn't be prioritizing going out and having a dinner party of loads of people if that's not the thing that's ultimately going to feed your heart and soul. Now, ultimately, we all need balance in our lives. And sometimes we can sort of become increasingly insular, and sometimes being challenged to come a bit more into the world can be a good thing. I'm by nature introverted, and it's healthy for me. My wife sometimes encouraging me to sort of come out and kind of do things. It's a good thing. But it's making sure that you're doing things from the right place. And I think the secret here, like the guiding principle here, is work on connection to yourself. Meditation practice, self-care, self-love, connecting to yourself emotionally. The more that you do that, the more that from that place you can be conscious about, is this something that I want to do? Is this something that's going to feed my heart and feed my soul? And that becomes your compass. That becomes the place from which you decide what to do. So I hope this week's episode has been helpful. A reminder, we're growing the library of meditations on my YouTube channel, so please do check those out. There's a new one every other week, every other Sunday at the moment. We also just started a new series last Sunday called Therapy Stories, where we're going to be letting people tell their stories in their own words about what their experience of going through therapy has been. And we're starting with David from this series. We're also going to open this up to people that haven't been part of in therapy as well, but David was a great place to start. So do check that out. If you're not already, please do follow me on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. We put different content out on the different platforms. So you may well find, certainly you'll find if you go to Instagram or Facebook, you'll see different things to what you see on YouTube. We are really working this year on growing the library of content and putting these ideas out in a way which is easy and accessible. So I hope you'll find that helpful and supportive. We're always open to suggestions. You can please send in your questions, but if you've got ideas of things you'd like to see on the channel, you can always comment below the videos, but also you can email hello@alexhoward.com. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. As always, be kind to yourself. Go gently.